Chad was the chairman and CEO of DuPont for many years. He was the chair of the board of Bank of America and until a few years ago of Royal Dutch Shell. And when you were the chairman of DuPont, you introduced a strategy that had three components, right? One about integrating sciences across the business, right? The other one about pursuing knowledge intensity across all businesses. And this really speaks to the conversation that we're having here today. So I want to turn to you. And again, after your remarks, let's have a conversation about place-making innovation, universities, the state of the world, and maybe some of the opportunities that you are seeing. Chad,
and the box, the microphone.
And the box.
Thank you, Roberto. Roberto is so much fun to do. We've done this before, and we always surprise the big what he's going to do, including the box. So that's great. I want to highlight a few things from a study I had the honor to chair over 10 years ago about research universities in the U.S. But before that, because that's 10 years old, I want to put it in the context today, and I want to start with something that I think is a little profound. In the next 4 years, we're going to see the collision of three of the biggest factors that any of us have ever seen in our lifetime. So you check me and see if I'm anywhere close to what your test is. We're living in a very disorderly world today. This is number one. I'm on the UN Foundation board. We met last week for 3 days in New York. I have never seen the United Nations Leadership Board depressed. Security Council totally ineffective. And the only good thing they had, because none of the quote leading countries could do anything, was the African countries had come together and discussed and brought to the General Assembly a proposal that passed that blocked one of the leading Security Council members from doing something really bad for the world. That was the only good thing he had to say. So I do think this is, without getting into the details, it's more disorderly than what I've seen. And I'll predict to you in the next 4 years, it's going to play out. We're going to get it back on the right track, or it's going to get so much more disorderly we don't even want to talk about it. So that's factor one in what we're talking about today. Factor two is just on the last panel, artificial intelligence. I believe that's another thing that's going to play out in a way that we just can't visualize today. So let me give you an analogy of artificial intelligence that's probably different than you've heard before. It's the printing press. In 1440, the printing press was invented but not commercialized. 14 years later, it was commercialized. Now, think about the change it made. Yes, there were a lot of monks that used to transcribe the Bible that were out of work. And so it was a gigantic productivity improvement. But that had nothing to do with the impact. Books didn't exist the way we know them today. Knowledge transfer didn't exist. So what the printing press did was so much greater than a productivity improvement. To me, that's what AI is going to do for us, but we can't visualize it yet. The people that saw that, I know, could not visualize what would happen from the printing press. And I don't think we can see it yet either. So my thought is, as it plays out, and I do think in about 2 years, that we're going to see the big impact starting to happen. Now, AI is, in 1988 at DuPont, we ran an AI program to take a bunch of knowledge and put it in one place. AI is not new at all. It's the speed and size of transactions that will change in the next 2 years. This is the difference that I'm talking about. And the third one is the weather. So other people would say climate. I don't know what climate means. I know climate summation of the weather, but that confuses people. Everybody knows what the weather is. When I was at Shell, I was concerned, although we really supported the right action on climate change, energy transition. I was concerned because we didn't have a climate scientist on staff. Are we really up to date on the climate? So I insisted they give me the list of the top 10 climate scientists in the world. I got people to order them 1 to 10. I called each one personally and said, well, 3 of you to come and spend a week with us and make sure we have the latest climate scientist. Well, everyone on the first phone call said yes, and they agreed to my dates. They all came. I won't take you through all the week, but it was an absolutely fascinating week. But I challenged every one of the team, come away with the one thing that was the most impactful from you that you heard from these three climate scientists. I'll tell you mine. And it actually came from the German, three different countries. It was a very diverse group, but the German. And it was the sudden, unexpected heat waves and the human body's ability not to withstand that for more than a week or two at a time, and the mass death that will happen. And after it happens the first time, people aren't going to sit there and let it happen. And we think immigration is a problem today. We see nothing yet. And from what we're seeing now, I believe that's going to happen faster than we thought. We always knew that could happen, but we thought it was 50 years out. I say in the next 4 years, and we actually had some of those events this last year, it actually happened. So what I say is we got these three factors. We got a very disorderly world with no mechanisms to handle it. We got AI, which is going to change everything. We just don't know how yet. And right now it doesn't have the right rules of the road probably built into it. And third, we have this weather impact that's going to be great in the next 4 years. So I don't think as you think about everything you're doing, you can isolate yourself from that reality. So with that is background. I think there's as much opportunity in that is hazard. So, but I hope I got your attention with the hazard. The research university study. I was asked to chair this. I think they wanted me mainly because I was not an academic, because they were hoping we'd recommend a whole lot more money for research spending, and I thought I had more credibility in doing it. We had public universities, private universities, and the business sector involved in the work. It took about 2 years. Mm-hmm. The charge from Congress, it was a request to Congress, give us 10 recommendations to make research universities better. Very simple, straightforward. They took more words to say that, that's all it said along the way. So we took the first 8 months to really answer the question and not take it as a given. What is the value of research universities? Because the kind of given was they're good, you should make them better. And it was not, I wasn't clear, I guess they were, but I didn't know. So what we did is tracked individual things that impacted the well-being of all Americans. And could we track them back to research universities? I give you one from my company, DuPont. It's called nylon, a product I think you already had. So you say you Google who invented nylon, they'll say DuPont. But they'll say it's Wallace Carruthers invented nylon. Well, where did Carruthers come from? He came from a small Presbyterian college in Missouri, where he got his first education. If that college hadn't been there, I don't know what would happen to him. He went to the University of Illinois, a public university, where he got his PhD, and he started working on polymer science, and then he went to Harvard. And then DuPont hired him out of Harvard with that knowledge of polymer science to kind of create what would become nylon. He was a very unusual guy, by the way, because he wouldn't come until we built a university campus for him to work on. So it's called the research station, but it was actually buildings around, a lot of trees and parks and cafeteria and library and stuff like that. That was his requirement to come, so we built it for him. And it was a good investment because he had been in nylon. So we set that title is Research Universities and the Future of America. And so our premise was that continued leadership of the U.S. in the world was absolutely dependent on research universities. And I think we made a pretty convincing case for that. Then we came up with our 10 recommendations that I'll be glad to talk about if you have some more questions. I think we did not recommend more funding. We made the case for more funding and let the Congress figure that out for themselves. Two things that I looked through my 10 recommendations and said, what might be useful today and be current today. Our recommendation to the federal government is every one of your different agencies has a different form. And when you're applying for money and you're monitoring the spend. And so only the great big universities can have the staff to keep up with all these things. So you're ruling out these small groups. So, and they're all trying to do the same thing. It's not like you have a unique need because this is health versus something else. You could ask the 2 questions for that if you want to. And we just kind of laid that out for them, which was a really obvious thing to do. There's also funding that comes from the states, particularly for the public universities. And what we stressed to the states, they were too narrowly focusing where the money had to go. And it was really taking a lot of time and effort and probably losing out on the potential because they found a lead that was really better than the one they had and they couldn't go chase that. So we recommended to the states that they offer a little more freedom on that happens. So they were useful. One of the ones that this may hit you the wrong way or the right way, I had the CEO of Accenture on our committee, and he was really focused on the effectiveness of how you use your money at the universities. And the general pushback was, you're going to interfere with academic freedom if you're trying to be effective. His case was that we found 4 examples of ones that were very efficient, like everybody didn't go out and buy a different kind of notepad. We all bought the same kind of notepads and save some money. And so you were careful not to interfere with academic freedom, but there's a lot of space there. So you have to make that judgment. But I think that was pretty important in what we're doing. Clearly, what we would call place-based that was a key, one of our 10 recommendations. We didn't call it that. We didn't know the word then. But we talked about how companies working with government, working with university was critical to innovation. It was a key part of what we're doing. I think one of the parts, and I'll close here, once we had our 10 recommendations, we need to go test and see, did they work in the real world? Mm-hmm. So we went to 11 different cities across the country. And we had the universities in the city, the businesses in the city, and the government, both at the local and the state level, all come together and test our 10 recommendations. Is this really useful to you? What could you do about this? And what I found, I went to about half of those. And what I found is the way cities go about doing that is totally different. So my guess is right here, if you did that, you would do it very different than you would in New York City or something. Yeah. So I think it was very important to let them use it the way they could. I hate to pick favorites, but Pittsburgh was awfully darn good. Mm-hmm. And what I was number one, I was really impressed with the way Carnegie Mellon and Pitt worked together. But when an idea came up, they would agree that was true. Here's what we need to do. They would assign somebody to go do it, including maybe a member of the government. And then they would agree when they were going to come back right there in the room live. So this wasn't some academic discussion. It was real action. That was probably the best. But there's some others that were particularly unique. Nashville was very good too. So I would say so. Bill Frist, who you mentioned earlier, Senator Frist was also a part of a committee, because here we had a senator who had been from the receiving side from Congress, and he was probably a great contributor. And with that, I'll be quiet, Roberto.
I hope you won't. So, Chad, thank you. Your 3 points, your last point about the weather, it made me remind about a book, The Ministry for the Future, that I'm not sure if colleagues here have read. That's very much about that. And it starts with mass death in India caused by the climate. And it's really, in some way, interesting. On the other one, worrisome to see how tangible that can be, as you were mentioning. But you also made a point about AI and the times when you were with DuPont. And 4 days ago, there was a report coming out, a paper at the MIT, about the use of AI and R&D. They followed more than 1,000 engineers and scientists in a material science company. Maybe DuPont, maybe not, right? And what did they find? What did they find? So they find that those people, they grew by 44% the number of new discoveries. Same team, same SETI. 39% the number of patents being filed, and 17% new products reaching the market. But there's one thing, 82% of all those scientists and engineers, they felt their satisfaction levels were going down. How can we deal with that, this human aspect, with new technologies such as AI reshaping the world?
I don't know. I've thought about that a lot. First, my answer was, this is just a productivity tool. and it should make you more productive. And we've had a lot of productivity. This is not the first productivity tool. I'm becoming more convinced it's more than a productivity tool. I was in a session with Tom Friedman, New York Times writer. The world is flat. Lectures flat. Yeah. So he is really focused on this subject, and he's concluded not what we have in AI today. We have some very advanced AI today. We're within 18 months of so much more advanced AI. And so one of his books, The World is Flat.
Mm-hmm.
He was out in Palo Alto, with I won't say what company, but it's probably represented in the room today. Saying, I want to see really how much this next thing really is. So he said, okay, give us a question. So his question was, the book, The World is Flat. I want to see a debate on it's right or it's wrong in its assumptions. I want it in 2 pages or less. 3 seconds. That was done. He read it. He's the author. He wrote the thing. He said, it's better than anything I could have done on the book I wrote. So I think there is an ability that's stretching what the human mind can do today if you ask it the right question. Someone had to ask the question. So that might be where we have the advantage. If we can think of the questions better than the AI program.
We are in a setting here. I come from the global south. I come from Brazil.
Why do you say global south?
Let's say I come from Brazil, an emerging nation that has a different reality, that has different challenges, right? And there is one big difference. And I was listening to Venetia this morning, and Venetia said during the breakfast that we had, that the notion of competitiveness, it's not established within universities in Greece. That's pretty much the same in Brazil, pretty much the same in my country. But one of the things that's a big a difference too is the US, the UK. These are societies where the importance of knowledge, it's pretty much understood. There's a consensus in society about that. That doesn't happen in the country where I come from, unfortunately. And you led, and you mentioned that, being an industry leader, you led a major study and work with universities. But more than that, you've been working with universities throughout your career, in your corporate career, at the Council on Competitiveness, and other places, right? One of the things that we talked here was about the languages. How did you learn to speak the different languages, university, industry, government, and connect those things?
Oh, that's a good question. Look, I just personal style. I never, and absolutely today, never the smartest person in the room. Never went in with that assumption that I had better ideas than anybody else. And so I had to learn from everybody else in the room. And what I find is the more you can make the person you're learning from comfortable, they will tell you more. And the best way to make them comfortable is be sure you're using their words to relate to them. So you don't use words they don't quite understand. And so if they call something, that's why I hit you on Global South.
Okay.
I don't know what that means, but I don't think I like the word, because I think it implies something that it may imply something to you, it doesn't apply to me. So I don't want to use that word. I want to use words that we can talk about. So I think just being sure you're listening heavily to the person. And one of the best tests of listening is when they say something, do you ask a follow-up question, or do you have to get your point in next? So if I'm talking to somebody from a university or anywhere else, I want to be sure I'm understanding them and asking more questions than I am talking. And if I'm not listening 2/3 of the time, it's been a bad conversation.
How can we systematize that process? Do you think that we can, if we want to have better engagement, university, industry, governments, what could we do to develop that capacity?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned government. We had this thing in Shell. It was really neat. We had this simulation game, and you played it standing up, walking around the blocks and stuff like that, and worked on climate change. How do you solve climate change by 2050 and we would do it in 2.5 hours in this thing. And you played different roles. You were in a particular locale. You were some people were the NGO, some people were the government, some people were the energy company, the utility company, and you rotated around playing these, and you get these questions. They come up with a simulation program. But everybody concluded at the end, the government's got the toughest job because they have so many more people you got to explain it to them, talk to them. The NGO doesn't have any trouble at all. They know exactly what they're trying to do. They don't care about anything else. Generally, so the government's got the toughest job. So I think much more than how do you listen to universities, is how do you listen to governments and understand what they're doing, and how do you find the ones that are effective at accomplishing that. But I think it's just really valuing what the other person's got to say. Back in our home state of Tennessee, we have 2 former mayors of major cities who also went on to be governors of the state from 2 different parties, who have come together now and they do podcasts on the other guy might just be right. So although they come from different parties, they talk about subjects. They've been doing it for 2 years now. And they'll maybe come in and interview somebody, and they'll both interview them from different perspectives to try to understand. But what they're showing is they do have different points of view, but they are really care what the other one says. So I think fundamentally, you got to care what the other person's got to say. It's not just we're going to sit here till you agree with me.
It's a bit about empathy, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And so going back to your first point, this seems to be becoming harder and harder in the world today with this turbulent world, right? This process of dialogue. What could we do?
Well, I do think we're at, I'm not talking about the U.S. election, although that's one factor, but I'd be saying the same thing if we hadn't had the U.S. election, or if the U.S. was going a different way. Somehow we have to recognize we're at a really critical point, and we need to find, I would say, reconciling solutions, not just compromise. I think it's going to be hard just to each of us give up some. That's not going to work. I think we got to get more creative about reconciling solutions. One that we could both. It may not be our first choice, but I can really live with that and be comfortable. I think we need to be having processes that work for that. The UN is 80 years old next year. I think the question is does it make it to 81? So maybe the UN process, which was a compromise to start with 80 years ago, is not the process. I mean, I want the UN to last. Don't get me wrong, but I think their whole processes that are based on compromise, not reconcile, or just don't fit the times.
So we need to re-engineer dialogue process. Yeah, that's how I read it.
Really well put, Roberto. You got to write that down somewhere.
Chad, you got to start talking about the state of the world, but you mentioned opportunities. What are the opportunities that you are seeing that maybe others are not, that are in the blind spot?
Well, I mean, I think it's AI. I mean, I think AI is the greatest opportunity that I've ever seen in my lifetime of what it could do. And we just, I mean, I think we don't, it's just like that printing press. That's why I love that example. You couldn't have visualized when the first printing press started what it was going to do. I don't think we can visualize, but I think we need to be searching for it. We don't need to be satisfied with what we are today. We need to find the things it can do to make a difference.
Is AI the thing that most excites you in the world today, or is there anything else?
It's the thing that most excites me and scares me.
That's a wonderful way.
And when I was talking to Friedman, and this was before the U.S. election, he actually came out and endorsed Harris the next day. He told me he was going to do that. But he said, we need rules of the road for AI. He called it the 10 Commandments for AI. And he said the only way we're going to get that is Harris as president. And I said, well, what do you think about the alternative? And he said, the only thing that bothers me more in the world is that if the other guy becomes president, doesn't become president, we could have much worse than not solving AI. So he actually thought it would be better for the country that the outcome came out the way it did. Not that that be the outcome he wanted, but I don't know. I shouldn't have gotten off into U.S. politics. I'll pull back. So,
questions? Does anyone have a question for Chad? Yeah, Paul.
In this whole place-making scenario, universities in the middle of it and all, what are your thoughts on measures we should be using to decide that we're going in the right direction? Measures of success.
I would say it's the number of linkages with business and government. So as a CEO of a company, I constantly went to the universities, which we had great relationship with, and I said, you have to be real time for me. To come to you with a need, and you say, well, we can work in next semester because we work on these semester systems, doesn't work. I need an answer tomorrow, literally tomorrow. And when you get that responsive, we can do it. I'm going to send someone and relocate them to Brazil. I want them to have a cultural training of what's important in Brazil, and I want it to be next week before they go. Can you meet my needs? Right. So I think it's when universities understand that you're going to have to respond in real time to companies' needs, and they also understand what that does to you, so they try to ask it the best they can. But the number of relationships there, not just will you give me money, company, so I can go do this piece of research. Yeah, we got that part, But it's this tie. And the other particular thing, if one of you want to have it tomorrow, I would recommend it to a company. Is we had a team we had to put on a major project. I want to train a whole team for 2 weeks, so everything they need for this project they've never done before. Can you put together an interdisciplinary group? The culture of the countries they work in, a little bit around the technology they're weak on. And when you could do that, boy, I think you'll found the answer.
And I think when you talk metrics, you are making the case also for network metrics, right? Not individual metrics, but measuring the network. I think it's super interesting.
Roberto always corrects what I say. Such a nice one.
No, I'm just reading what
He's
trying to understand. I'm trying to understand. So, any other questions? Yes, yeah, please. Oh, that will be a long throw. Let me help. Yeah. Good, great catch.
Chet, I'm not very optimistic about the future of the world, but it seems that you are even more pessimistic than me, and you have said that everything must be decided in upcoming 4 years. First question is, why exactly 4 years? Because if I understood it properly, you have said it will be either somehow solved or it will be much worse. And why are you so pessimistic? What bad things will happen in 4 years' time? U.S. war with China or what? Or climate change is so big or economic?
So I thought a long time about picking 4 years to say today. I've never said in public before today. It's not that I have some magic box to tell me it's 4 years. I concluded if I said 5 years, yeah, okay, it's the round number. 4 years, you'd have to think about why 4 years. I really do believe there's a sense of urgency here. And I think so many of these big problems, we keep saying, well, we haven't solved them in decades. We can go a few more decades. I'm concerned because the three of them coming together at once could just be a little more than we can handle. And I do think primarily because, so why 4 years? I think AI in its most advanced form we can see today, and that's probably not its most advanced form it's going to have, but the one we can see today. It's already made the most wealthy company in the world in a year, NVIDIA. So it's hard to think about. But I think that being interjected, I think the UN not functioning well in the process, and I believe we will probably have a couple of these massive weather events around heat that will occur in the next 4 years. And the probability of all these three things working together in a negative way is real. I think there's a lot of solutions. I'm fundamentally, I'm not as pessimistic as I sound if we deal with it. But I think the way we're dealing with climate change today is not relevant to the average person. It does not, if you really save your greenhouse gases tomorrow and don't have any more, in 20 years, it'll be a little better.
Mhm.
That doesn't sell to the average person on the street. I love the discussion this morning about the intellectuals.
Mhm.
I served on a American Academy of Arts and Sciences study on climate. And somebody in the room on the committee said, we intellectuals know more than they do.
Mm.
I got up and walked out. I'm no intellectual, but that arrogant attitude is exactly what's killing us. So I think one of the answers here is we got to be more inclusive in how we saw it. And I didn't answer your question, but I really think if you come away from here saying Holliday might be just totally messed up, but he might just be right. So what can I do for myself, my family, my institution to be a part of the solution? And maybe a little bit of, how do I build a little bit of a barrier just in case?
A final question.
So I'm just curious, building on your question, this idea, I'm sure I read in a greeting card somewhere, never take away a person's hope because it may be the only thing they have left. And I'm thinking, this is a really difficult time to be in our situation, but it's also a time of great opportunity. I'm just wondering, what are the kind of incremental mind shifts that we can make as leaders in educational institutions that might make a difference here? Because some of the things you're talking about are huge, and sometimes it's easy to think, what's the difference we can actually make? But what are the kind of incremental little changes to the way we think, in your opinion, that might actually, bring that hope back?
Well, and I can tell I sent too much of a negative message. I don't feel it, but what I do think is we share this planet. And the more you sit back and look and think about the fact we share this planet, and you think about just the reality, when I was born, that's a long time ago, there weren't but 2.5 billion of us. Now there's 8 billion. Same planet, same amount of resources. So we have got to just use this planet differently than we had before. Once we start to realize that, and I realize that someone that I don't agree with may have a better idea. I use the example of the podcast of the two governors. The other guy may have a better idea. Once we can start listening and caring more about that, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I believe we certainly can live on this planet with 10 billion people if we use our resources right and be just fine. So I think there's time to catch that and understand what it is. What I found, when I was working for DuPont every day, on weekends, I'd drive down to a little fishing village where I had a cottage, and there were people that fished for a living and did, real stuff, and they knew I worked for DuPont, and they'd never bring up the company unless I brought up the company. Then when I brought up the company, they had all kind of ideas. Then I'd eventually say, "Time out, that's enough." But from there, they had really good ideas, and mainly they had really good questions that we would never ask ourselves that question, because they get more to the fundamental. Why do you even care about that in the first place? Kind of question. So I think the more we could universities can do this. You can set up forums. Why don't you do it one tomorrow of people from all walks of life and come in together and just take a simple thing. How would you solve it together? Big accomplishment. So don't walk away from here thinking I'm pessimistic. I wouldn't be here if I was that pessimistic. I'd go get a bunker someplace. I think we can solve them, but I do think we need to step up and solve them now. We don't. The old processes won't necessarily work.
I have a final question, Chad. I mentioned in the beginning you led various super complex, sophisticated global companies, and a lot of people know you because of that. But you have founded different nonprofits. You have put a lot of time into various nonprofits, the Council on Competitiveness, the GFCC. You are here today. So that's a lot of investment in society. What's your motivation?
I think I could help in some way. The thing I've been working on the last couple of years is called the Mission Possible Partnership. And it's focused on the 7 hardest to abate sectors for greenhouse gases, 30% of the greenhouse gases. And we did a study to say it's possible. There is technology to decarbonize steel today. It just makes more expensive steel. So we need to get the first commercial projects up and see if we can run the cost curve down on those. And so I've been out talking to CEOs of steel companies and say, I need you to do the first commercial project. Yeah, and but by the way, what I found from that is it's been some encouraging and discouraging. But no matter what they say publicly and all their goals for 2050, don't believe anybody that talks about their 2050 goals, right? So some would say, okay, I'm going to go do it. I'm going to put it in. I got it. And others, you can tell in about 10 minutes, they're not going to do anything. And so then the conversation's over in 15 minutes. I'm not going to sit there, but I'm also not going to waste time working with their organization. They have people in their organization who want to do it, but if they don't want to make that decision and realize it's important for the world to demonstrate the technology, go to the next guy. You got to do it.
Chad, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for making a difference.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.